Hello, hello out there in Facebook land. Or really, wherever you happen to be watching this. And I had intended to actually start the live with, I wanted to put on that Jill Scott song, Golden. And there's kind of like the chorus line is like, living my life like it's golden, golden, living my life like it's, or maybe it's your life. Living your life like it's golden, golden. And then I was running late to start the live anyway, because I said noon. And anyway, I didn't want to go downstairs and get my speaker and do the whole thing, but I'm going to touch on how that relates for me to this piece around money and integrity. And welcome, welcome. Hello, Desmond. Hello, Jonathan. Nice to see you. Nice to see all of those of you who are joining as we begin here. So, welcome to those of you who are live, absolutely. I always enjoy the live engagement. Welcome to those of you who are watching the replay. If you're here on Facebook watching the replay, I always love just a little like, hey, so I know you're here, because I don't get to see you live. And whether you're live or watching the replay, I also really enjoy the dialogue. So I'd love any of your questions, either about what I'm saying or anything you'd like me to talk about in relation to money. If I say something and it sparks a question for you or it relates to something in your life, like, please bring it in. Let's have as much of a dialogue as we can. Same goes if this is on YouTube or on the blog. You know, bring your questions, bring your comments, and at the very least, like, I'll always come back and have some sort of written dialogue if possible. So with that said, let's dive in for today. It's always hard for me to know, like, where to start. All the pieces, like, they just really weave together. And today is a little bit more of a, well, there's a bunch of pieces to it, but I definitely wanted to tell a few stories. That was one of the pieces for me around this. I was like, oh, there's all these stories that I want to tell around this. Some of them relate to people who have come and worked with me in the past, or they're really personal stories about my life, but the places I've played with this. So anyway, wherever, welcome again as people join the live, and please, let's have a dialogue as much as we can. So that was one piece, was like these different stories that I wanted to tell. And the main theme for me about these stories is really this idea of, like, there's no one right answer. There's no one right way around, like, money and integrity. And I'll see teachers talk about, you know, always make your clients pay in full up front, or other people who say, like, always this, or always there's, or like, well, you know, if they've agreed to a payment and then they don't make it, like, you know, always have a contract, or always hold them in this way, or this is, it's like, this is what it means for integrity for you, or integrity for them. And I'm not really knocking any of those pieces individually, but the reason I wanted to share these different stories is that ultimately they point to the way in which, like, all human experience and all human interaction, like, anytime there's one of us, let alone, you know, two or more, is there's going to be complexity and nuance. And so of course that's going to come in our relationship around money. And then what does integrity mean around those things? So as people are arriving, I'm realizing too, I'm like, oh, like, look, I'm a blonde again. And look, like, my bra matches my lipstick, like, hi. So I want to tell some stories, and then for those of you who missed at the beginning, I was singing this little bit. I'm really, like, I'm not a singer, so the fact that I'm doing this, like, on public is kind of a big deal. But there's that song by Jill Scott, which is Golden. It's like, living your life like it's golden, golden. And to me, this is really this piece around, your life isn't golden. It's always golden, and it's going to be golden if you live it that way. So I really want to talk about this idea about not sacrificing for future payout. Like, my life will be more golden when, then it will be more valuable. Or your time, like, actually how much you get paid is not what your time is worth. Your time is just worth your time. So we'll come back to that. And then the other piece that really ultimately had me choose this topic, because some of you may have noticed, I put out a poll, and I was like talking about loving fiercely or money and integrity, and they were close. It was only one vote off, but actually loving fiercely won. So just in all honesty, I was like, but I want to talk about money and integrity. So that's what we're talking about today. And one of the big reasons is that I've continually returned to this theme for myself, which is I have never sacrificed anything for money. And this feels a little awkward to say. So at the risk of kind of tooting my own horn about that, I did not realize how uncommon that was until about, maybe it's 3 years ago. It was like could be as much as 3 years ago. But there sort of came this point where I was like, I kept hearing, I had heard this cultural story. So it wasn't total news to me, but there was some point where it like shifted into focus. I hear it so often, there's people who've made a lot of money, and then they hit this point where they're like, money isn't everything. Your life is more important. And I was like, yeah, I know. Like, and I started to realize, though, that this was like an interesting iteration. It kind of hijacked the same old story, because there's still this underlying assumption that you needed to make a lot of money in order to, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, for your viewpoint around that the money is not the most important thing to have validity. That people would listen to the people who had made a lot of money and then realized they'd sacrificed their whole life, and then they would go and then of course, like, they had a bunch of money to go back and then sort of teach things like meditation and embodiment, and like all the things, like basically creating your life around your money rather than, or your money around your life rather than your life around your money. But it was like it was kind of the same tired story, just in a new package, which was like, oh, I can teach this because I got really successful. I made a shit ton of money. And so now there's some weight behind what I have to say. And I started to look, and I was like, I have literally never done that. Now, that has absolutely meant that I was really poor at certain parts of my life. However, like, secret, that's true about a lot of people who also have a lot of money. Is what I started to realize. So part of what happened is that I ended up being in community for the first time in my life, starting about 4 or 5 years ago, but with people who had a lot of money. And I guess it was a little different. Like, I was surrounded by people who had a lot of money earlier than that at different times, but I was really just seeing the way that they were miserable. So it was this iteration of the story of like, I have a lot of money, but I'm really miserable. And one of the things my ex-husband and I used to do, especially for men, there were a lot of men who had made a lot of money, but they were like miserable. They didn't have, not even just intimate relationships like with women or sexual or romantic, but they were just freaking lonely in general. And they had like all the things. I remember going down to LA. Maybe we just got flown to LA like just for this thing. I don't know if that's possible. I can't remember what else though we would have been doing in LA at this time. And this was I don't know, it was before I had my son, so it's got to be 11 years ago at least. And to these people, and they were like, young. It was the whole kind of startup era money. I mean, it wasn't that era, but it was like the money from that. in getting driven around to like, you know, clubs that had no name that you only knew about if you knew where to go, in a limo with the da 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 da, and like these fancy pants guys. And they were like so, and then they would sit in the corner of this club, like on their phone or not, you know, and they were just so miserable. And I was like, what is even happening here? But I started, so then again, coming to this piece. And so a lot of what my ex-husband and I would do was work with people and how to have intimacy in their lives. And again, not just romantic sexual intimacy, but like friends and, you know, just to do the things that are connection based, that create joy in our lives, but also to do that work that's also where we really find joy in ourselves. That's basically it's not dependent on anything. It's neither dependent on how much money we have or all the things and the houses and the cars and the stuff. Also not dependent on being able to take vacations to fancy places, and also not even dependent on other people, right? Dependent on other people like liking us or giving us the kind of validation we think we want, or the funny paradox of that is that often this kind of inner generated joy, I would say more than happiness, but like inner generated joy often ultimately creates more intimacy with other people inherently. So they went hand in hand. And then again, like 5 years ago, I started to see in this community that I was part of also, first of all, seeing some of the same things, like hearing the same stories of like, well, I'm really successful, but then, you know, my health broke down, or I was never with my kids. I missed, you know, the birth of one of my children. My marriage fell apart. I ended up in the hospital. You know, I had so much chronic fatigue, I couldn't move. I lost all my friends, or, you know, like I didn't even know who my friends were anymore because I couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't real. Or not even being able to point to anything specific, but just like I was deeply unhappy and deeply unsatisfied. So there was that piece. And then I also realized, like so many people, as I actually got to know them and hear more of that intimate journey of like the intimate story of their journey, I think, you know, again, I have people look at me this way at this point too, because anyway, I won't go into that, but we so often don't see the full story. It's like we see people arrive, you know, kind of like fully formed from the story of the Buddha being born, right, is that he came fully formed out of his mother's side. We have this, like the Adam and Eve story is like this, like, what is it? Athena came from Zeus's head. This is how we see whoever we think of as successful or famous or, you know, whatever. We can see that and we just sort of see them. It's like they arrived fully formed. You know, they must have always had 20,000 followers. You know, they must have always made multiple six figures. They must have always known what they wanted to teach and how to teach it. They must have always, like, we don't see all the stuff behind the scenes, which is, so for my own self, and I've been pretty honest about this, but I'll say it again, is like, you know, I've been fucking broke in my life. At many, many points in my life, I've been really, really poor, living in a Buddhist monastery. I was, you know, I was really broke. My family was really poor when I was a kid. Again, like being a single mom and restarting my business, like I went through some, you know, hard times there financially, and it isn't to say that that didn't cause me some hardship or stress. But I think, and this is where I want to put this piece, like it just kept ringing in my head. Like somehow I wanted to say, you know, I have never sacrificed for money. And this is where story time comes in. So there's two stories I want to say here. So I was just talking about, you know, in the early days of being single mom of 2 kids, but I actually want to go back farther than that. And when I was sitting down kind of thinking about like, what are the pieces I wanted to share in this, you know, money and integrity piece, I was reminded of when it was my then boyfriend, now ex-husband, Decker, and we had already started the Authentic Man program with his business partner, Brian Bear, and there were other people involved as well, too many to mention now. And so the Authentic Man program was running, certain pieces were getting on a roll, but we had the opportunity. We did not have the money for it. We did not have the credit for it. Like we were in our mid-20s. We had no business doing whatever the heck we thought we were doing. And we ultimately ended up renting this loft space in San Francisco. But when we went to look at it, and then we were looking at the money of it, and it was like, the idea was that then we would have a space. And so Decker and I would live there, but we would have a space for our workshops, for our events, and to be able to do this more regularly and for it to have a location. And we were really like, we went back and forth. It was so scary. I don't even remember what rent was, but we did not have it. And there was this one point where I think Decker, he asked me, he was like, or maybe we were sort of asking each other, but it was ultimately like, what's the worst that could happen? And I remember looking at him and I was like, well, we could lose all our money. And again, I think this is like this fear that runs in the back of so many of our minds, but we don't voice it in that way. So as soon as I said these words, and actually in, not just in my own mind or even out loud to myself, but like in connection and with another person, well, we could lose all our money. Like that's the worst that could happen. And of course, also when you're in your mid-20s, you feel invincible and it's sort of like, yeah, so what? We didn't have kids. And so I'm not saying there aren't other things to take into consideration sometimes. However, there was something about naming it in that way where it just lost its grip. Like as soon as I said that and we were looking at each other, we were both like, that's not that bad. And we also had, and this connects to the other piece I was saying, is I remember I also said this part out loud. I said, I trust that we will create and run and participate in a business, like we will relate to other people in a way that even if we lose all our money, like the likelihood we're going to be homeless is so low. Like I trust that we'll still have everything else that we have. Not only will we have ourselves or each other, but we'll have these connections, like we're okay. And really trusting not only are we okay in this moment, but that we would continue to be okay, that we would walk the path with the kind of heart and love and integrity that meant that if we lost all our money, it just wouldn't be that bad. So that's one story around this, is like, so in a sense, you could look at that as sacrificing for a future payout, but it's not. We didn't sacrifice our lives. We just were like, we sacrificed our money, for whatever this other thing might provide. And we had no idea. And, it's this interesting piece, which is that ultimately at this point, so that was the beginning of a company called Authentic SF San Francisco, which became Authentic World, which kind of exists now, but like in a way, I mean, it's almost like it was something that we said we would put a stake in the ground, and then it kind of popped like a bubble. I mean, this is a very, very short, truncated version of this. And there is literally some version of processes and practices and frameworks that were created within that group, that organization, that community. I'm not saying just Decker and I, but within that group all over the world, every continent, like so many countries, places that I never would have imagined, that I never met, I never trained these people. I don't, like it is everywhere. And I look at that and I go, that happened because we said it would happen. We didn't say that would happen, but we said, this is worth it. And, I don't teach pure authentic relating anymore. I don't like own some stock in that company. I don't make money when anybody does that all over the world. I feel like it was like this pure gift. And it came in a lot of ways from that declaration that the worst that could happen is that we would lose all our money, and going like, that's okay. So, and then this other piece, so then linking to this piece around being, this is, now like more 5-6 years, probably 4 or 5, 6 years ago, and being a single mom and having 2 kids and these different pieces. And Now, I would never say that, like it's certainly not my place to ever say that somebody should live with less money. That's not the point. But the point is that I have always, from the time that I was young, and it continued even into a place where it would have been very easy. So that continued, through the organization with Decker, and then in our separation, and then where I went in my own life. But also, like, it'd be very easy to be scared in this place I was in and be like, actually, it's more important to make money. But I have just always oriented towards, what do I want and when I say my, that includes my family, but it's like, what do I want my or our life to feel like? Even when I didn't have conscious wording for that, that has always been my orientation. And that's the piece, like, I didn't realize that explicitly. And I also didn't realize how rare that is until, again, a few years ago, when I just saw so chronically kind of the opposite of, and again, I'm not saying people consciously set out to do this, but ultimately when they would tell the story of their either success or their, blah, 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 however it looked, it almost invariably included some version of sacrificing their life for money, success, fame, and whatever those things meant to those people, or whatever they mean to you, like some version of that. And I was like, I don't think I've ever done that. And I really took a good look, and I looked back. And so, when my daughter was very young, and these are personal decisions. This is not me saying how people should live their life, the specifics, but I do encourage, to me, this is like money and integrity. This is life and integrity. This is like the deeper question of integrity is, what do I like? How do I want to feel? What do I want my life to be like, to look like, to feel like, beyond any external trappings, and actually using that as a compass, rather than, well, when I have this, then I'll be able to make this happen. And certainly I acknowledge that I have privilege in this, in terms of education, being white, my family being educated, etc. Although I did not finish college, I've had privileges in this. But it also really came from this choice to say that my experience of my life was more important than any like external gain in my life. And I took on some debt when my daughter was young, and I chose to have for us to live much more simply, and not have many things, and not get to eat out or buy things, or these kinds of things. I chose our life to be more simple, so that I could have us have the life I wanted. I mean, this is the thing, when people talk about lifestyle, it so often immediately goes to like, what's the lifestyle you want? And it's like, I want to travel this often, I want to have this much money, and I want to have these. It's like the lifestyle is somehow external, but the quality of life, that's internal. And I believe, again, there are external circumstances that have impacts on this to some extent, but most of us, most of the time, truly get to say from the inside out, this is the life, this is the quality of life I want, and I choose it now, regardless of my external circumstances. And that meant that, I watched other people's children while I had my children, rather than having my children in some other kind of daycare, so that I could do more teaching, coaching, do more of my life purpose. Again, for different people, the external choices are going to look different, but the quality of life for me was us getting to be together, that it be slower, that there be more space around it, that these were things, this is the quality that was important. So where your externals might look different is if you sit down and go, what is the quality? And that your values, the quality values that matter the most to you might be different than the ones that matter to me, or they might need to be expressed differently in some way. But that meant let's not go out to eat, or let's not be able to eat fancy food, or let's eat more beans and rice, or let's, not have new blah, blah, blah. Let's make do with like our funky this, that, and the other, because we get to be together and we're not rushed. And I'm not stressed. I'm like, I was a little stressed about money because there really wasn't any money, but it's like, I'm like, that's okay. That is okay. And as I'm saying all this, I do think it's really important for me to give like some serious credit to my mom for this. Again, whether, I think in some ways it was very conscious, but I think she did a very similar thing when I was young and we were very poor. And we had no electricity. We had no indoor toilet. As a child, in some of these things were very hard. Like I did not have the clothes that other children had. But she chose for us to live in this very simple way. And she created very simple beauty because for her, the value of getting to be there with me when I was young was more important. And I think whether I understood that consciously or whether even and now I understand it as an adult, but even looking at this for myself, like that did get in at a deep level where I was able to make those choices throughout my entire life. And this is where my philosophy around come home to go big comes from, which is, at this point, I make a good amount of money. There are plenty of people who make more money than me, but I make plenty of money now. And I have no debt, and we have a new car and it's paid off, and I work, I work hard because I like working hard. And honestly, I think most people actually like working hard, like in that way that feels good. So, but I have really flexible hours, and I get off work, when my kids come home, and I get to be with them, and I live somewhere beautiful, and I get to go have my hair blonded, and like I have not only have I not sacrificed for money, but that has not meant that ultimately I also always had to sacrifice money. And I think that's the dichotomy that I want to tease apart, is that it has to be one or the other. Either, you have to make a bunch of money and sacrifice for the money and then go back and like reclaim your life, or you get to have your life but never really have any money. And again, am I saying it's easy either at a emotional, energetic, or at the tangible physical level in terms of choices? Like, no. Any life of integrity has its own challenges, but they are really rewarding challenges. And I'm a sample size of one, but I think there are others like me, in some way, shape, or form. But I like to look like, I'm like, if I can do this, I think other people can do this as well. And that there really is this sense that I stayed, the come home part, like I stayed really true to myself, to my values, to what I wanted for me and my family, for what I wanted our life to look and feel like, for the quality of life versus like the external lifestyle. I stayed committed to that my entire life. I look back, I think I could probably tell you the stories of like all the jobs I've had and when I took them and when I left them and how I did it. Like every piece of my path, I have stayed committed to that, to this is how I want my life to feel. And it has not, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but it has not meant that I don't also have a beautiful life of luxury. And so I think that's what I want to be out in the world, like for you, watching this, but also just in the world more, is this idea that it's not an either or, and that we can stay deeply committed to those pieces of integrity and what feels right. And we can also do just fine financially and be successful even in by the external cultural standards. And we can have nice things, and and like it isn't one or the other. We don't have to sacrifice one or the other. Sometimes there are moments. Personally, my perspective and my bias is that I would always rather sacrifice the money for the quality of life. And part of the reason for that is that I believe it's actually much easier to go that other direction. Like once we get like a certain, I mean, I have known people who have a lot of money and they're still freaking anxious about money. And they still think they're never going to have enough. And they're still afraid they're not going to make enough next year. And they're still afraid they can't provide for their family. And they have the same fears that I had as a single mother of 2 children, like trying to juggle whether my rent check was going to bounce before my child support check came. I did not have more anxiety than people who have like $500,000 in the bank, you know, plus so what I have found is it's much easier to go my direction than it is the other direction. People who have gotten into like, well, this is what I need to survive in this world, or this is what success means, or this, like, I can't give this up because then blah, 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 who knows what would happen. I have seen that it's very, very hard for people to rein it back the other direction, and it is not necessary. So it's like one cultural story that was like, you know, get your success and then be able to retire and have freedom got kind of tipped over by, you know, just another somewhat painful cultural story, which was you have to have made a bunch of money to really realize that money isn't the end all be all. And it's just not true. It's just not true. So I want to check. I saw a couple of comments come through. Hi, Karen. Oh, she's not here anymore, but hopefully catching the replay. Dan said, I love this advice. Definitely bringing up some deep self-worth issues and confusion. What do I actually want for me? Totally. I don't know if you're still here, Dan, but maybe I'll put a link in the comments, because I did a piece on there's sort of this concept in like the personal growth world, which is like reported life or created life. Like it's one or the other. Either you're just like, life is happening to me, or I create my life. So I did a piece around what I call chosen life. And I think that's where I did it. Anyway, I'll look and see. One of these videos or blogs that I wrote really had to do with this idea of, yeah, what do I want? And in more, I don't know, counterculture, personal growth, personal development worlds, a lot of times we've swung away from what we see as the broader culture's definition of success, but then we just swing to what our little culture says success is, rather than going like, no, this is what I want. And I'll know like, for me, I don't have this yet. So I guess you could say I'm not successful yet, but I have in my mind, I'm like, when I have an outdoor shower, when I have a home that has an outdoor shower, then I'll know I'm successful. But again, for me, and I don't hold a value judgment, I have known mothers who truly had work that they had to put into the world. Like when they did the whole process around, if I only had 1 year to live, you know, I need to write this book. And I'm like, great. If I had 1 year to live, like I would fucking blow my savings and I would just be with my children. That's all I would do. So, you know, whether the like 1 year to live is a valuable question to ask, or just really sitting in like day to day, moment to moment, how do I want my life to feel? And how do I make everything I do an expression of that? And I believe ultimately, not only will we have the experience of success moment to moment and day to day, because we're already giving ourselves the life we want, but I believe that that kind of a life, if we also continue to like, you know, build towards what we want or expand a little bit beyond what's comfortable. Like, again, I hear a lot of people like, oh, like, it's just too hard for me to talk about my offerings. That's just not who I am. I'm like, well, then people are never going to know about you. So is it a little uncomfortable to say like, yeah, I offer this, you know, I do this, you can come to this workshop and I'm really fucking good. Like, if you want to learn this, come to me. Is that an expanding beyond maybe what's like a little bit comfortable? Sure. Is it also true and authentic? And can I live like in my values and still say that? Abso-fucking-lutely. You know, so if we keep doing that, like, we will ultimately build something around us where there isn't this dichotomy between like, I can either have money or a life of values. Like, no, you can really have both. Rebecca said, I'm 66 and I've made a lot of sacrifices for money. I've worked at jobs that were painful. I pushed it at work for a lot of years, but it has never been about luxury items. Money can mean quality of life, living in a relatively safe place. Oops, jumped ahead. having a car that isn't going to break down somewhere at night. And now as I'm aging, it's really nice to be able to make some expensive healthcare choices. Totally. So again, these are really, they're very personal decisions for sure. I'm just going to jump ahead because I want to see. So Rebecca said it's also really nice to be able to give away some money 100% without feeling it too much. A little for someone who lost it in all the fires or whatever. I want my life to feel safe and generous, and I'm willing to make sacrifices for that. Working at jobs that are in demand, but maybe not artistic. Hey, Allison, I just saw you jump on. 100%. So this is the other realm that I would say is, so this was more like 20 years ago when I very first got into the realm of kind of personal development, and I was involved in the group that put on the courses called Arete, which there's a whole evolution of that. People would come and do Arete, which was this personal growth, like transformational weekend. And then their life would explode. They'd see all these things and they were like, oh my God, I want to quit my corporate job and I want to lead Arete. And so anyway, I did a whole video. Again, I can post this in the comments. It's about what living your purpose really means. And I think we can live our purpose anywhere, whether we're, a teacher, a course leader, an artist, a tax person. I talk about how I did that in corporate. I worked for a really big company called LexisNexis. Honestly, I fucking loved it. And I don't actually think this is about like not working hard. I love working hard. And I also hear Rebecca say something in here about, I want my life to feel safe and generous. And sometimes that takes more money and sometimes it doesn't, and we get to choose. But generous was a piece for me as well. And there's two ways I went about that. I really resisted this for a long time because I would go to these events like, I can't remember what they're called, but there's some weekend that's all about money. And they have this big pitch around, maybe it's the Millionaire Mind or Millionaire blah, blah, blah. And, but no judgment. And they have this whole thing. They're like, but imagine if you had all this money, how much money you could give away and how generous you could be. And I was like, okay, show me those people, because they seem really, really rare to me. I'm not saying they don't exist. I mean, as far as I can tell, love them or hate them, like the Bill and Melinda Gates seem to be doing that. I hear you on your level doing that, Rebecca, and these things, but I wasn't seeing it. And I was kind of like, okay, great. So that's just like this altruistic hook that they'll give for people to make more money. But very few people are truly doing that. And every step of the way, like I said, I would see these people with a shit ton of money and they'd still be like, I don't have enough. I don't have enough to give it away. I don't have enough to feel safe. I don't have enough, so again, it doesn't mean that we never sacrifice or that we never do anything we don't want to do or anything that's hard, but really realizing that actually wherever we are, we can be generous and we can create some kind of safety. And sometimes there are physical things. Like, I totally get that. I also did that for myself. So last year was the first year that I tied my giving to a program. And I've been wanting to do that for a long time. So again, this is money and integrity. Ooh, and I want to make sure I get to these other stories in the next 15 minutes. So my No Man Diet program, when I ran it last year, there's a couple layers to this, but one is I really decided, the way that I was like, okay, yes, I'm going to run this program, is that I looked at it and I looked at my finances. And one of the wonderful things about knowing how to live well on very little is that it doesn't take much for it to make a big difference in your life. And you can I was like, wow, I have what might not seem like a lot of money to some people, but I was like, I have plenty of money. And so when I looked at running my No Man Diet program and creating it for the first time, I was like, you know what? If this program makes me no money, it is worth it for me to launch it and run it. Creating the content, learning everything I'll learn in the process. Like if I gift this program away, if I only get 2 paid people, if I, given what I have to do for marketing and creating and all these things, if I make no money, it's still worth it to me. And simultaneously, I kind of put a stake in the ground and I said, I will donate 10% of the revenue of the No Man Diet to a local organization. I think it's called The Living Room. in this moment it's escaping me, but it's up here near where I live, and it supports under-resourced women and children. So it's like I wanted that. So I tied my program to that rather than saying like, well, if I make this much, I'll do it. It was just like, or after this much, I'll do. I was just like 10% of the revenue. And then that ties my success to my giving. And I was talking to a friend the other day about this idea of like, I think the next place I want to do that is, so that will always be true. As long as I run the No Man Diet, 10% of the revenue will go to an organization, this organization or similar. And, but I was like, you know what? I just want to claim like a certain amount of money that I set aside for, giving. Like you're talking about generosity, Rebecca. It's, it might be charities. It might be being able to pay for someone's rent from if they get dislocated from a fire or a flood or something like that. But like just to know, and I was like, man, that would really mean that I then was committed to something. Like if I'm like, I'm gonna put $5,000 a year in that kitty, then I need to know that I have above and beyond $5,000 for our life to feel good as well. So I sorry, Allison's a millionaire, blah, blah, blah. So yes, I think again, those are those pieces where, how do we create them within the place so that they work within our lives? And that's money and integrity. So, okay, these are these stories I wanted to tell. I told the story about Decker and I just saying like, yeah, so we might lose all our money. And if that's the worst that could happen, we should totally go for it. And then I really wanted to talk about then this place of, I wrote a post last year, or maybe it was the year before, but it was around your freedom is more important than your money. And it kind of had a particular slant. I told a couple of stories in it. And one was a story about the program that John Wineland and I run together. We had a couple that signed up for our program, put a deposit down. We were clear, deposit's non-refundable, blah, 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 blah. And then they were like, we don't want to do it anymore. And I had a little back and forth with them about that. And then there came this point where it was like, I would rather just refund them their money. I mean, John and I talked, it was not just my decision, obviously, because we run it together, but between us, there was sort of this sense of like, there's somebody better for our program. Like these people don't want to be in it. I certainly don't want to hold them to be in our program if they don't want to be in it. How much energy, both actual like attention to this, but also just the energy in the world, did I want to keep caught up in this thing, like that they wanted their money back and technically they were committed to it. And we just refunded them. And at that, like, it was like in that same moment, and then it was like these 2 spots that became available for our program. And then these people just like showed up and they were like, oh my God, that's exactly what I want. They paid, they were thrilled. They felt like they had received such a gift because the program had been sold out. And then there were these spots and they got to grab them. And it was like, oh, poof, your money is more important. Like your freedom is more important than your money, than going like, I need this, whatever it was, $1,600, and you were committed to it. And it was like, we freed up that energy. And the money part kind of took care of itself. I had a similar example around my son went to like a private school for a year and a half. And then at some point, the person who was committed to paying for it like had a disagreement about some of the last payments and whether he was there and whether he had to pay, whether they were there. Like there was like this thing. And I was getting the bills because they were coming to my address, but someone else was responsible. So I was just like passing it on. And then there came this point where I was like, I am so grateful to this school, like what that made possible in my son's life and what then that made possible in my life, and like the ways that we grew and the beauty, like what this school in itself and like these people who run this school, like how deeply grateful I was. I could afford to pay. It was hard. Like it was a stretch, this last like remaining piece to pay it, to just have it clean. But I looked at that and I was like, that is worth it. I don't even fucking care that I wasn't the one, like I didn't commit to paying this and really this other person should. And like, should I go and argue with them and then put them into, like just this thing? And I just sent the money with a letter that said, I'm, basically apologized. But more than it was more than the apology piece. It was just like, I'm sorry that if this leaves any bad taste, and I want you to know that I have nothing but gratitude for the time that my son was at your school, and I love the work that you do, and I'm happy to pay you, And again, it was like, oh my God, that was so much more important than whatever this money was and the stretch that it might be for me to pay it. To be able to offer that out with generosity and with freedom and with release was so important. And then there was also this other piece, though, to bring in, like, well, is this just always letting people off the hook? Like, I had some people respond to my post in that way, and I was like, no, of course not. But that part is so important to acknowledge, like that often we're the ones who get caught in our own like money spot where we think like, but I need to hold them accountable, or that's not in integrity, or like they signed a contract, but really we're the ones who are caught. And so actually our freedom is so much more important than our money. However, and again, all the stories don't end up like this. Like, again, there was another program where somebody decided to drop out at some point and they stopped paying. It was just like, poof, like, this doesn't always go like this. However, so again, there was a program that somebody was in, and they were on this pretty extended payment plan, and there came a point where they asked to pause payment for a month, and then ultimately they never picked it back up. And again, I think it was like $1,500, and it was like, I could just write that off. And I had done this in the past, and I had felt the way that was so liberating and important. That was an important lesson and step for me. And then like partly because they had been in this program over time, but also I knew them before that. Hi, Nathan. There was something that just, I was like, I don't feel good when I do that. And it's not even really about the money. There's just something, it's like, that just it's not sitting right with me. And I ended up writing an email to this person. And I said to them, I said, hey, so-and-so, I just want to check that we have shared reality about this. Like, my intention is not to go after you for this money. I don't know if I said it like this. I'm kind of paraphrasing now, but I basically was like, look, my intention isn't like to shame you, blame you, or even go after you for this money. But it just, something isn't sitting right about not acknowledging what seem to be the facts in this. And I just want to check if we actually have the same facts going on here. I said, this was the program. This is what you agreed to pay. This is what you have paid. This is what I see as your balance remaining. Is that your recollection as well? And this person wrote back and said, yes, that's totally my recollection. I don't have the money to pay that right now. And I wrote, and I like the same energy that for me was freed when we refunded that couple, or when I paid for my son's school, was actually freed just in this like acknowledgement between us, where they said, yes, that's true. I owe that money, and I can't pay it right now. Or I'm not paying it right now. That's kind of how I read it. And I was like, thank you for acknowledging that. Like, I feel clear. And they were saying some hardships, and I said, I just wish you the best. Like, I hope that all clears out, blah, 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 whatever. 6 months later, out of nowhere, like apropos of nothing, I had not reached out to them. They emailed me and they said, hey, I have the money. Can I pay it to you now? And I'm like, yes, that would be fantastic. I have no doubt. So again, this is one of those things where like it's an exception in some ways. And no, it doesn't always turn out this well. But I really do believe that it was exactly the way I handled it, and that I was clear inside my own self that I wasn't reaching out to him in that initial email to get the money. But neither was I just going to let it slide because it didn't feel good to me. And I was just like, there's something then between us, and it's not even about like, letting him off the hook. It's like, I believed that this person wanted to live with more integrity than that. or with more shared reality or something. There's like, I know the words aren't quite right here, but there was something about all of us being more like raised up by meeting it in that way. Yes, in the external, but at that kind of the energetic underneath. And that meeting it in exactly that way actually allowed this person then to step into their own true sense of integrity. And like, I think if I had brought any blame and shame, or if I'd been like, you owe this money, or if I had just let it slide, I wouldn't have got paid that money. But like exactly that way of meeting it allowed this person then to come forward and be like, and to want like that. There's like what they did and that I got paid the money, but inherent behind all that is that some part of them wanted to pay me because of how I related to them around money. So that's like this, there's no easy answer. Like, where do we find the freedom? And I think that's really the question. And maybe the word is freedom for you. Maybe it's slightly something different, but like, where is that? Is letting that be more of an organic inquiry and noticing that it's not always the same. Sometimes it's just, like, here's your refund and I bless you on your path and I don't want you at any of my events because like, or whatever, or like, I'm just going to pay this bill because then it's like clear. Or maybe it's saying like, hey, I think you agreed to this much and this is how much you've paid, and do we have shared reality around that? Like, where is the actual release of energy? Where is the freedom? Where is the, in a way, it's intimacy. Like, what gets created in each circumstance, and choosing what you want to create. I'm just checking if there's like another piece here. I think I want to see what these comments are and just see if there's another piece there. Dana said, decided already to put 10% of all my future income into a foundation helping kids in need. That's amazing. Super awesome. I give you like high five, kudos for that. And then Rebecca said, so maybe the ultimate is doing the cost benefit now and for the future. Be conscious with spending, earning, giving. I have sacrificed to accrue money to buy certain freedoms. I have sacrificed the current for old age safety. All very conscious, happy with my choices. Ultimately, like, it's the last sentence that gets me. Like, when you say you're happy with your choices, I'm just like, that is fantastic. So many, the more common story that I hear is what I lost, and that they came from fear rather than, I remember getting into a, I got into like a fight with not a fist fight, obviously, but an argument with a Zen teacher of mine. I think I was like 19 years old, so I look back with like, I'm like, oh, I was so cute. I was like very, passionate, and part of it had to do with this piece that I was trying to grok around, like, how do we live in the moment and also brush our teeth? I mean, it was literally down to that specific, but really we were talking about, like, to me, this is the essence of like, how do we live our lives? So this is kind of beautiful, because this actually goes to what I wanted to talk about with the whole loving fiercely piece. So I will do that next time. But to me, this really goes to this piece of, how do we hold, and it's not balance exactly, but how do we hold both? What if this moment or this day or this week or this year, what if this is all we have? How do I want my life to be? How do I want to spend my time with my children? How do I want to treat my mother if she, dies much sooner than I think she might? How do I, like, what if this time is all I have? And there's certain teachings that will all come from that side. Like, this is the only moment, live like this is the only day. And there's an absolute truth in that. And then the fact is, most of us, especially now, we're going to live like well into our 80s. we have to also hold that. Like, not only, I actually remember having a conversation with my friends in high school about this, but it was less about like money and things like that. We were talking about like, this is hilarious. I did not remember this until just this moment. We were in Carmel. I grew up in Carmel Valley. I went to Carmel High, and we would go from the high school and we would walk like down into Carmel proper. There was a candy store, and I ate so many Jelly Bellies when I was in high school. Like, that was like, oh my God. Anyway, there was this candy store. I would get like a pound of Jelly Bellies, and I'd eat them like in a day. It was so disgusting. Anyway, and we would go to the park there, and we would do like our stupid high school things or whatever. We would have these like deep conversations, and one of them was really this idea. We talked about like running, basically streaking, like taking off all our clothes and running down Main Street in Carmel naked. I don't know why that was the thing, but it was basically like, if today's the only day, like, don't think about like this kind of thing. But also, yeah, I probably am still going to be alive tomorrow, and I have to think about the impact of that. I took off all my clothes and ran down Main Street of Carmel naked. And so even then, there was something in that for me. Like, that was an interesting conversation. And so I think, that's part of what I hear you speaking to, Rebecca. And I think that is included in this, is like being wide enough. Like, we don't have to choose one story or the other, but to go like, okay, well, how can I live in a way that honors really the possibility of both? I mean, I have had too many people die way too young in the last several years, to not also feel that part that's like, I don't want to die with a fucking perfect credit score, or like having saved a ton of money but like not having spent that time with my kids, or not having us had these amazing experiences together, or all these things. But also, yeah, I do want, like, I also don't want my kids to feel the weight of the responsibility of me when I'm probably going to be like 85 or 90 or something. Like, my grandmother is 94, and she doesn't look like she's going to die anytime soon, which is great. That's not a complaint. It's just like, that's me having like, another 50 years. And I don't want my kids to feel the weight of that because I was like, live like there's no tomorrow, and when they were young. So anyway, that's a whole tangent. I hope you enjoy my Jelly Belly story. Dana said, today I refused to take money from a prospective client simply because it was against my principles and I need the money. Did I act foolish? I don't think so, because I feel good inside. I would agree. I would also say, like, there have been times, and not even like about values, but I remember somebody who wanted to work with me, but like went very fast. Like, he was just like, he's like, I want to put, money towards it, and I want to pay you this money. And he like, and then he was like, whoa, actually, I need to put a stop on that check. I need to slow this down. And I realized that it actually, like, I could say, well, he was kind of lame about that. He already sent me the check. I should be able to cash it, whatever. But it was on my end where I got caught up in the excitement, and I didn't say, you know what, we're going to slow this down. And no, you can't pay me more money until you know that you actually want to do this thing with me, and that's my own internal work to do. And so I hear that in what you're saying too, Dana, which is like, I don't know what the principles are. Maybe they work for a gun company and you don't believe in that or something. Like my partner, his company does military contracts, and again, this is a privilege. Not everybody has this privilege, but he's good enough at what he does, and he's been working there long enough, and he has enough seniority that he can basically say, I don't want those contracts. And yeah, he could probably make more money. And again, we are privileged to have enough money. He doesn't need to do that. But I think that I would always choose to live with less after a certain point. Like, Rebecca was talking about being able to live somewhere safe or have a car that doesn't break down. Like, there are things that I want to be able to provide for myself and my family. Ultimately, I think most of us think we need more than we actually need. Like, there is this simple, and I have learned that. I've learned that. I don't want to say the hard way. It doesn't feel like the hard way. I've learned that through truly living that way and having it be beautiful. My life when we had very little money was beautiful, and I don't regret it. But again, like, I'm grateful that he shares that value. So Maria, looks like Maria is saying, what principle? Oh, so she's just questioning, are you involved in serving the public? So I don't know, that you can choose to answer that question or not. I don't know what the value is. Rebecca said, yes, exactly. And it's super interesting as you age. Again, like, you've got some years on me, Rebecca, and I really, I honor and acknowledge, like, the wisdom that you have by the years that you have on me. And I have that experience, like, as I'm in my 40s now, like, things are different. And I was talking to my stepmom this morning, and she's in her mid to late 60s. And those are some of that we were really talking about, like, some of what this is as we age, both at the physical health level and what it is, you know, to feel secure and safe, and what happens with our mental faculties. And it's a powerful piece, I think, aging. So thank you. I'm just going to pause for one moment and see if there's something. I guess the last thing I want to say, it's not really like wrapping it. It wasn't necessarily the whole point. I really wanted to share some of these stories because I think some of them go counter to a lot of what I hear, the overarching stories around money or around integrity, or the way that money and integrity work together, or what you need to do in order to be successful, or what success means, which I still often see coming into a dichotomy, that either it's about not catering to conventional success, or it's about having conventional success. And I'm just like, it just doesn't have to be a dichotomy. That's my main underlying point. But I want to say again, like, this whole idea of come home to go big, and I have another piece on that as well, but it was like a fluke that I even had kind of that, you know, that it, as a saying or as like a thing that it came to me, but it, layer upon layer, it continues to be something that not only informs my life and has informed my life. Like, when I look back, I'm like, that's like the foundation of my entire life. But it continues to inform my life, but it informs not just in this realm of business and success and things, but like, it informs so much of what I bring into the world and how I choose to do it. And I think that when we do the work of, like, truly coming home to ourselves, our deepest truth, our values, slowing down enough to be conscious about the choices that we're making, etc., like, when that is coming home also, it's not always like, I just do what I love, or that's the coming home is making a conscious choice. Yes, I want to work more hours now because I know that means this, or but not doing that because we just think it's absolutely true, and staying really, really conscious also to the true impact. Because again, I sort of spoke about, like, knowing people who had a lot of money but still had the same fears I did, you know, when I had very, very little money in my bank account. But to make it personal, I also experienced that. Like, there was a point in time that was only maybe 4 years ago when I would get anxious if my bank account got below like $2,000. So this is, you know, most people don't talk about the money in their bank account, but I'm just gonna, which is very little amount of money when you have 2 children and you're living in Northern California. And at the same time, I knew people who they had the same, oh, no. So this isn't about other people. So about me. So then I, you know, about 2 years ago, I noticed that my bank account was staying consistent at $50,000. So again, for like I was like, that's a lot of money. You know, some people are like, that's no money at all. And what I noticed is that I would hit the same level of anxiety when I dropped below 50,000 that 2 years before that I hit when I dropped below 2,000. And I was like, oh, so that is mine to work with. I can't blame money for that. and think that, oh, like I need to do this now for that later. Because that's what I thought at 2000, like, oh, but then when I get to $50,000, or if I make $100,000 a year, then I won't have this anxiety. We have to work the anxiety, because if we don't work it, we will have it no matter where we're at. And we can work it when we have very little money. We can work it when we have a lot of money. We can work it all along the process, but we have to stop blaming external circumstances for that anxiety. That's an internal response. That's an internal orientation. And that's ultimately the piece, is like that internal piece. And so when we keep coming home, I think also it will lead us on the path. And to go big, I'm like, big is so relative. Big, like having thousands and thousands of followers, big in terms of making $1 million, big in terms of, best New York Times bestseller books, big in terms of it, like I've come up against this again because I'm very, very close with people who have all of those things that I just referenced, and I can compare myself to them. And then I'm like, I'm not even sure I want that. So this goes back to Dan's piece, which is like, what do I really want for me? And for me, big is different. There are things that I want to say and that I want a larger portion of the world to hear. And like, this is one of them, right? Alignment around money and values and integrity. And I want to be able to teach in the way I teach. And I want people to come. And, but I don't want to travel a lot, and I don't actually want to teach more than I teach. And right now, I don't want, this is actually another one. This is not like sacrificing life for money, but I don't want to write a book right now because I don't want to set that time aside. That would be then sacrificing, again, for instance, time with my children, or time when we just like fuck off and don't do homework and go to the river after school instead of whatever. Like, I don't want to limit anybody around what it means to write a book, but I have watched enough people write books that it really does seem like at some point you got to go like, that's the thing. And right now, that's not my thing. And so I'm not big is just like relative, but we come back to ourselves. And I do believe that then we can have what we want. So thank you. Thanks for those of you who are here live. Thanks to those of you who were here for the replay, wherever that is. For any of you who are engaging in this inquiry for yourself in any way, thank you. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Ciao for now.